Last time you were here, Dr. Damas, because you're doing double duty today. You were not necessarily
Yeah.
scheduled for today, but the conversation we got into last time was so important that I asked if you would be willing to come back for us to continue it. And we were talking about the brothers, not the bros, but the brothers. So let's go ahead and give Dr. Damas his round of applause.
What makes you think I'm not worthy? I'm not worthy. I'm always humbled and very, very appreciative of the love and support that the crowd gives me. They show up every Thursday,
Every
amped
Thursday.
up. There,
Hmm.
so I,
Ready?
I aim to not let them down. Right?
Well, then let's do exactly that because you got us talking yesterday, or not yesterday, last week about the challenges that men are facing, the challenges that they are navigating when it comes to their mental health. And really, I think the response we got to that was overwhelming. I don't know if people reached out to you directly, but we heard from a lot of brothers who were so touched positively and just really empowered by that conversation because that topic, Breathe Brother, it's time for your summer mental health tune up, really was a topic that I think more men would want to talk about, but don't necessarily have the tools. So let me start by saying thank you for that. And let's get into it. Just if you can remind us why it is that focusing on men's mental health at this moment is so important.
So last month, June, was Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. So it was also Men's Health Month, and then
Mm.
we had Mental Health Awareness Month, I think, back in March. Um, and so I think societally, we've slowly come to accept, begrudgingly in a lot of cases, that our perceptions of what is healthy behavior, healthy habits, healthy kind of conceptions about how we move throughout life, how we, exist and kind of manage our circumstances moving through this world have not been the best for us, right? So there are things that, from the grind and hustle culture to the stoic, unwavering idea of a man who is like, immune from, feelings or moments of weakness or insecurity to what the definition of manhood is.
Mm.
And the idea that you can't figure it out all on your own. And so a lot of this stuff is ingrained in us as children. So I was talking about how, like, it took me some time to kind of realize some of the things that I've been taught are actually unhealthy for my own kids, right? And so a lot of this stuff is instilled in us as children, and then we carry it with us up into adulthood. And there are times when those kind of like narrow-minded or kind of narrow conceptions of how to deal with circumstances, how to express yourself, how to process new information, how to, go through change, all these things we're not prepared for. And
Mm.
society doesn't make a safe space for us. And in what I was saying, one of the things that a lot of people in this field talked about was that sports allows men a safe space in a certain aspect of things, right? Because you're allowed to be emotional in that space, right? So if you
Mm.
take the emotion, you take some of it, even not even as a competitor, but even as a fan, right? So that's the space where your team, you didn't even play, but your team lost or something is going on, and now you can like express all your feelings. You can cry, you can be joyous, you can do all this stuff in the kind of theater, the bubble of sports, but then taking that out into other places, that's rejected, right? Now you have to be more stoic, right? So you can't just be upset, you can't cry, you can't express your frustration outside of that arena.
Mm. And that, when we think about authors who have, I believe it was Jason Wilson who we had on the show before, and he deals a lot with the emotions that men experience and the inability for men culturally to feel as comfortable as they should with expressing those emotions. And one of the things he talks about a lot is that when people, human beings, regardless of your gender, when you cry, those tears are basically the product of hormones in your body that are taking the stress or whatever it is you're crying about and allowing your body a way to release them. And when you are not allowed to cry outside of the bubble of the athletic arena, then all of the weight, the hurt, the harms that men are carrying, it ends up in some ways feasting on what is available inside because there's no release for it. And I just think it's incredibly sad that we have created a society, or that a society exists such that we have an entire half of the population that has no real systematic mechanism for recognizing the correctness of experiencing the fullness of their emotions, because our emotions are our guidance systems, they're indicators. And when you are cut off from your guidance, when you're cut off from your indicators, when you're cut off, it's like trying to go on a road trip. You ain't got no GPS, you ain't even got no Yahoo Maps, you ain't even got an atlas in the back, and if you have one, you don't know how to read a map anyway, because you've been
Yeah.
growing up on GPS. And that to me is one of the most tragic things about the way in which we cordon off emotions for men in this society.
Yeah, so and you hear women as they get into relationships with men, and I've had this experience myself where it's like, hey, we're just not at the same level, right? Like, you've had the opportunity as a woman to kind of work through these emotions, and you're like an expert at this, right? So it could be, I
Mm,
can express myself. I have a willingness and an openness to discuss this stuff, and for us, it's kind of like, what is all of this? What is this that you're talking about here? Like, what is I I can't go there with you. I don't even know. So my analogy, it's like lifting weights, right? Or
mm,
exercising, right? Like you go to the gym and then you only work your chest or your arms, right? Because that's what looks good and that's what, right? And then like you get to a point and you're with this other person who's like, let's do legs. And you're like, I don't know how to do legs. And they're like, what are you talking about? Look at you. You've been in the gym all this time. And like, yeah, I've only been working my chest and arms. And your woman's like, yeah, but you got to do legs. That's part of the foundation. They're like, I can't do it. So I don't know how to do it. And so now you have this imbalance in yourself, right? Which makes you top heavy, just using that analogy, but it's not the fullness of your being, right? It
mm.
doesn't allow you to experience everything you can in the gym. It doesn't get you all the benefits that you
Right.
can from exercise. Puts you at greater risk for recurrent injury. And so, the idea that we can do it all ourselves is one
Mm.
of the limiters. I'll do it myself. I don't need any help.
Yep.
The idea that, hey, if I say that something's wrong, I would say like, it's like my boy would say to me, yo, I would complain, but ain't nobody trying to hear it. And I was like, yeah, bro, ain't nobody trying to hear it. You know what I'm saying? I was reflecting back to him, like, yeah, I felt the same way. Listen, dude, ain't nobody trying to hear it, man. You got to get to work, feed your family, dude. It is what it is. But in that moment, he was saying, like, yeah, I do have some stuff to get off my chest. But
Mm.
ain't nobody trying to hear it, so I'm going to keep it to myself and accept
Right.
that reality. And then
Wow.
there lies where you get to periods of depression, anxiety, PTSD. We started where we left off last time was talking about the effect of living in urban areas and
Right.
PTSD and how that disproportionately affects us in
Yeah.
terms of like Black men, Black people in general, but Black men having similar rates of what's called complex post-traumatic stress disorder from
Right.
growing up and living in underprivileged urban environments. So that means if you grow up in the hood and you're exposed to the violence, the death, all of that stuff, you have the same risk of developing PTSD as if you went off to war, right?
Mm.
So the idea that we can acknowledge this kind of stuff in veterans, right? We can say, "Oh my God, that's a disability. You've experienced a trauma. You witnessed things. There are things happening to you that we need to address." We acknowledge that. But for us, and we have the same rates of PTSD because of the environment we're in, we're
Okay.
kind of like, "Hey, you just got that's part of that's just part of life." And so we do get behaviors, and I'm sure a lot of men, because I do it myself, hypervigilance. You go to a place and you're looking around, see, who's that dude? Why is he looking like that? Why is he standing like that? Why he's got his hands in his pocket? Where's
Mm.
the exit? Right? Why is my back? I don't want to sit with my back to the door. I want to make sure that I understand, right? So there's hypervigilance. There's like recurrent thoughts, things, memories, things that happen. I've personally been shot at a couple of times back in the day, so I
Yeah.
still remember those. I've seen my friends held up at gunpoint, so those are those memories that you have to deal with. Seeing death, I've seen
Mm.
dead bodies, I've seen all of that stuff, right? So, as someone who has experienced it personally, I'm like, yeah, man, like like I was a kid when I saw my first chalk outline with the blood spatter on the sidewalk, right? I was 8 years old when somebody murdered somebody across the street and threw the gun in the building, and I found it under the stairs.
You know,
So
I'm reminded as I'm listening to you that scene in Boys in the Hood, that opening scene where we now have the meme, y'all want to see a dead body, where it's a bunch of
yeah,
little kids on their way to school seeing a body like that they have to like think about and grapple with, and they know it's a dead body because the phrase was y'all want to see a dead body, and like the trauma that those children then carried into the school we saw play out in the character of young Trey when he has that sort of moment in the classroom, for those of you who have seen the film. So Dr. Damas, that point or that part of what you were talking about, it resonated with so many people, so many Black men who never thought about the exposure to violence that they had experienced throughout their life as one connected to PTSD or as anything other than just a normal part of living in these communities. And so that for me is a reminder that we have so in the society normalized this idea that, number one, Black men don't have feelings, or men generally don't have feelings, but we're talking about brothers today. Black men don't have feelings. They certainly don't have the capacity to release any emotion that might seep in, because you got to keep the emotion away, but it might seep in. And then we create, or we have environments that we force these men to live in that essentially are designed to perpetuate the very harms mentally, emotionally, spiritually that we're talking about in ways that make it cyclical. And I think when you said that, you gave people permission to realize, number one, this shit ain't normal. Number two,
yeah,
this shit ain't right. And number
yeah.
three, there has to be a better way of looking at it, and a way that we can incorporate a variety of tools that can help us not be trapped by this sort of oppression. And we didn't even talk about the CBD. We didn't even get
No,
to any of
we haven't
that.
gotten that yet,
We never
right?
got to that. We never got to that. So I know your time with us today is short, and I'm grateful that you're going to be with us on the other side of the commercial break. But if you could at least, because I know Amina's giving me the look, the man is going to cut us off in just a minute. If you could just lay for us the foundation. Number one, are there tools that Black men can use that will help them navigate this sort of trauma that feels unescapable?
Yeah. So, a lot of the traditional tools that have been available to, let's say, the society as a whole, we haven't accessed. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? Of course, we always talk about the systemic barriers that are in place, limited access, resources. But what's really important is the cultural aspect, right? It's great to say, oh, I can speak to a therapist and find a therapist. So that's a great concept, right? But does that person understand where I'm coming from?
Mm.
When I speak to them and I speak to them in certain ways, do they understand the nuances? Do they understand the things, the unspoken things, the words between the phrases? And so, the words that aren't said, but we know it doesn't need to be said. And so, therapy, talk about exercise. So when we come back, I'm a big, big advocate of exercise, lifestyle changes. There are studies that show that exercise itself is as effective as at treating depression than the antidepressants we get prescribed
Wow.
without the side effects, which can include like low libidos, sexual dysfunction, sleep disturbances, and the weight gain and that kind of stuff. So like exercise itself, if you get up and start moving around, can improve your mood and your mental well-being at the same levels as prescription drugs.